Alrighty, thank you all so much for joining us today for our webinar on how to nominate for the Heritage Award for the 2026 awards. My name is Ryan Coons and I am Maryland State Folklorist. I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon. Before we jump in, here are some housekeeping items. Here's a reference shot of the features of Google Meet, which of course is our communication platform this afternoon. In this particular screenshot, I'd like to draw your attention, please, to the microphone on-off toggle button, which you'll find in the center left of your screen. If you're not actively speaking in any given moment, for recording fidelity, do please keep your microphone off. And here's a second reference shot, and I'd like to also draw your attention to the chat feature located in the bottom right hand of your screen. Unlike certain other communication platforms, notably Zoom, please be aware that Google Meet chat feature is public for everyone all the time. We like to begin meetings of the Maryland State Arts Council with a series of what we call grounding slides to introduce us to you, our constituents, so you get a better idea of who we are and where we're coming from. We begin with MSAC's Land Acknowledgement Statement, which derives from MSAC's constituent-requested and award-winning Land Acknowledgement Project, in which staff consulted with tribal community members whose lands are claimed by Maryland to create a public resource on land acknowledgements with quite a lot of useful information in it that you can find on MSAC's website, msac.org, under the Resources tab. And following the best practices of accessibility, I will read this and the following grounding slides aloud. We acknowledge the lands and waters now known as Maryland are the home of its first peoples: the Akahannock Indian Tribe, Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedarville Band of Piscataway Indians, Choptico Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nassau-Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway Conoy Tribe, Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Yakagani River Band of Shawnee, and tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many from the lands and waterways that nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and waterways to heal so that they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and waters so that our reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. MSAC's Equity and Justice Statement is that the arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. MSAC is committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organization and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, disability, class, language, and/or ability. Our vision is that MSAC plays an essential role ensuring every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. And our mission is that MSAC advances the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all the people of Maryland. In 2024, MSAC adopted a new strategic plan. And these are the 5 pillars and goals associated with that plan. They are access, to bolster access to arts experiences and resources; awareness, to amplify the stories of Maryland's arts sector and the value of public support; connection, to foster networks within and beyond the arts sector; equity, to cultivate a thriving arts ecosystem centered in equity; and leadership, to commit to a culture of care and innovation. And you are welcome to read more about this plan and the contents of it on our website, msac.org. We invite you today to engage with us with this series of creative meeting actions. They are to celebrate being in the space with other creative people, to engage with everyone's presence as a gift, to acknowledge that together we know a lot, to enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry, to share your idea and trust that it will be heard, to use I statements, such as I think or I feel, to focus your language on the task at hand, to hold one another accountable with care, to honor all perspectives and build on shared ideas, and to balance speaking with listening. MSAC makes available a variety of professional development opportunities, which I know you are aware of because you are here joining us at this webinar today, one of many professional development opportunities. In addition to information sessions like this one and topic-specific sessions, we host an occasional virtual event called Coffee with the Council, in which MSAC counselors and staff join members of the Maryland arts sector to share successes, discuss challenges, and focus on any specific topic. We are also visiting you in your communities through our regional office hours, and roughly every 2 years we visit every single county in the state. And do please check out our Eventbrite, both for all of these professional development opportunities and to know when we're going to be in your community next. If you are aware of a professional development opportunity that you would like MSAC to host, we hope you'll be in contact with us to share that. And you can do so on our website, msac.org/contact. We also invite you to get involved with us. We are literally unable to do our work of sharing grants and grant funding with the Maryland arts sector without the help of you, our constituents. We are regularly in need of Maryland residents to act as panelists to review and score applications. And I will tell you right now, the Maryland Heritage Award, the subject of today's webinar, is currently looking for panelists, and we'll talk more about that later. But I invite you to consider applying to be a panelist, even if you are considering making a Heritage Award nomination. We are also occasionally looking for editors or coaches to give input on program policies, and coaches to help with the Poetry Out Loud program. And you can find a schedule of public calls and all the necessary details always on our website, msac.org, under the About tab and in ways to get involved. And I will note, and again, we'll talk about this more in a moment, that all of these ways to get involved, panelists, editors, coaches, all come with compensation for your time and your labor. Now that the grounding slides are over, here is an overview of our route today. I'm going to share information with you about the Maryland Heritage Award, and then we'll discuss how to make a nomination, the actual nuts and bolts of that process. We'll discuss MSAC technical support overview, some nomination strategies that we've observed to be quite effective, and time at the end for question and answer. If you come up with a question at any particular moment during the webinar, you are welcome to place it in the chat. And depending on how things are going, I'll either stop and answer it right then and there, and or wait until the question and answer period. But please always feel invited to ask questions. So without further ado, let's jump in. The Maryland Heritage Award is an annual MSAC program that is designed to recognize what we call long-term achievement in the traditional arts. And in-house, after a series of public editing programs and, public editing processes, we have come to a definition of the folk and traditional arts as community-based living cultural traditions handed down by example or word of mouth. And I'd like to give you a few examples of what we do include under this umbrella of community-based living cultural traditions handed down by example or word of mouth. This list is in no way exhaustive and is meant to provide some breadth, but certainly not depth. In performance-based traditions, we're talking, of course, about things like dance. For example, Maryland Heritage Award winner Rock Howland of Frederick, a flat-footer. We're also talking, of course, about music, a variety of musical styles and genres, as exemplified by Baltimore County gospel singer and director and Maryland Heritage Award winner Shelley Enzer. But we're also talking about things like storytelling and theater. For example, Baltimore City's Black storytelling tradition, or Donald Owens, who is a steward and Maryland Heritage Award winner of Baltimore's Black theater tradition. Oops, that was a keystroke I didn't intend, my apologies. When we talk about living cultural traditions that are community-based, we're also, of course, talking about material traditions. So these things can include things like costumes, for example, Lumbee Powwow regalia, which we've supported through the Folklife Apprenticeship Program, or crafts such as blacksmithing. A very early Maryland Heritage Award winner, Wally Yater, who's a very talented blacksmith in Western Maryland, but also foodstuffs like maple syrup making, or textiles like the Baltimore album quilt tradition, or visual traditions, of course, like painted screens also of Baltimore. Perhaps unusually amongst all MSAC grant programs, Maryland Traditions and the Maryland Heritage Awards especially support and recognize the so-called occupational traditions. And this is rather unusual. It's an area of the folk and traditional arts that some folks are not necessarily aware of and are not necessarily aware that they are eligible to receive the award. And by occupational traditions, we mean things such as agricultural traditions, such as kitchen gardening, or architectural traditions such as the former Sparrows Point Steel Mill in Baltimore, or land-based traditions such as Pocomoke homelands or Piscataway homelands, or any number of other tribal landscapes that now are within the place now called Maryland. And of course, given the rich history of the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries, we are of course referring to maritime traditions here, such as the Waterfowl Festival on the Eastern Shore. Again, this list is not in any way exhaustive. It's meant to just give an idea and whet your appetites. Folks who want to make a nomination of the Heritage Award are able to do so in 3 different categories. We accept nominations of one person or a group of people, nominations in the category of place, and nominations in the category of tradition. And when we talk about nominating folks in person or people category, we're talking about folks being recognized for their artistry, or their community leadership, or their creative practice, or their documentation, or their entrepreneurship in a folk and traditional arts area, or their presentation in the same, or a specific type of performance, or research. And oftentimes, even though I have these bulleted separately, folks are being recognized for their long-term achievement in multiple of these particular bullet points. When we talk about nominations in the place category, we're talking about places that achieve long-term prominence over a period of generations. And that means often that these places serve as gathering spaces for community fellowship, and sometimes also serve as sites for traditional practices. And you see this photograph here of the Arch Social Club in Baltimore, Maryland, which received the award a number of years ago, specifically because it had achieved that long-term prominence over the period of generations and did so serving as a gathering space for community fellowship. And I will note as we go through this presentation that all of the photographs you see here are of current and previous Maryland Heritage Award recipients, documenting them and their traditions. Perhaps most challengingly, when we talk about nominating in the tradition category, this is frankly the nomination category that receives the lowest volume of nominations. We're talking about actual traditional practices that might also be reoccurring events or occupations or local knowledge, cultural movements, organizations. But one example, you see here a photograph of Cultura Planera, the recipient of a Maryland Heritage Award several years ago, I think 2018, who received the award in the tradition category for the Puerto Rican dance and percussion traditions of bomba and plena, as again, but one example of many. Now I'd like to share a note about time. Of course, the award is given in acknowledgement of long-term achievement in the folk and traditional arts, and we often receive a lot of questions around what that phrase long-term achievement means. And in an attempt to ameliorate any confusion that you might have, we specifically don't assign this phrase a hard and fast number. There is no one-size-fits-all time measurement in long-term achievement, specifically because so many of the traditions that call Maryland home have vastly different timescales. And if I can provide you 2 deliberately vastly different examples here, very far on a spectrum away from one another. If you think, for example, of tribal landscapes, right, in the place category, tribal communities have maintained relationships with their lands for centuries and millennia. Contrast that long-term achievement measured in centuries or millennia with something much different, something much more recent. For example, the Baltimore club music tradition, which is, I believe, only 30 to 40 years old at maximum. That is a vastly different timescale. That is not a tradition that can have time measured in centuries or millennia, and yet it is still an important tradition that calls Maryland home. So long-term achievement in the Baltimore club tradition might be a matter of years or decades, as opposed to centuries or millennia. Both are entirely eligible. Both could be the subject of very strong nominations, but you'll notice, of course, that the long-term achievement is measured in very different amounts of time, and that is encouraged. Each of the 6 annual Heritage Awards that MSAC provides come with a $10,000 funding grant award. I always stumble over those phrases since it's the Heritage Award, but technically this $10,000 is a grant. And the use of funds, perhaps unusually amongst Maryland State Arts Council grant opportunities, use of Heritage Awards funding is unrestricted, meaning that awardees can use that funding for almost anything they would like. As with all MSAC grants, we are not able to, funding cannot be used towards political contributions, for example, to political candidates or lobbyists, but almost any other use, and we don't track it, can be made. I've known folks who've put it for specific events, put it into savings, used it to make improvements on their particular building for that particular community. The sky's the limit. Botany, you have a question, please.
I'm sorry, Ryan, to interrupt, but I don't know if it's my computer or something is happening, but I don't see your screen.
Oh, that is very strange. Folks also in the call,
everybody else see it?
Thumbs up to see if you're seeing my screen. I am presenting. There should be something visible.
Okay, now I see it. This
Oh,
is
you
so
do see it
bizarre.
now.
Okay, so maybe it's just mine. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's quite all right. If you're not seeing it, I would recommend maybe exiting the webinar and coming back in. That reset sometimes might be all that one needs.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Also wonderful to see you.
Same to you.
Returning to payments, we are able to make payments of the Heritage Award to individual residents, and like all of our grant opportunities, also to Maryland-based nonprofits, colleges and universities, or units of government. But we're also able to share them with, for example, limited liability companies, specifically sole proprietorships. Vatani, how are things looking? Are you able to see the screen now?
I was able to see it and then blacked out, and then now I can see it again, so I'm crossing my finger.
Fingers crossed that it stays.
Oh, some people's video are pausing. Okay. I'm at program overview. Here's unrestricted funds. Is that where you are?
You're seeing what I'm presenting, yes.
Okay.
If you're seeing folks' video go in and out, that might be a Wi-Fi issue. We are recording this, so if there's something that you miss not being able to see it at any one time, you will of course be able to go back later. But glad things are working, at least at the moment. It is the end of the week, and I know I've encountered some gremlins in the tech today. Moving right along, here is a schedule overview of this cycle's Heritage Award with all the things that are happening. You are able to nominate right now, and the deadline to make a nomination for the 2026 Heritage Award is September 26, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. Anything that comes in after that point will actually not be able to be submitted within Smart Simple. I mentioned at the top of the webinar that we are currently looking for panelists to evaluate the Heritage Award, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth here a little later. But if you are interested in doing so, we are accepting those applications until September 12th. And panelists themselves will do the bulk of their at-home review in October and November, with the public virtual panel meeting on December 9th. Nominees and nominators will be notified in January 2026, with funds processed in February, and the final report will be due in August 2026, just under a year from now. Eligibility for the Heritage Award requires residency or location in Maryland. And we phrase it this way because we often encounter some folks who are perhaps rightfully confused about what is and is not eligible. We are able to provide award the Heritage Award to traditions that have been in Maryland for centuries, millennia. Of course, I mentioned the case study a bit ago of tribal landscapes, but also as equally eligible traditions are traditions that have come to Maryland much more recently through immigration and migration and other formats and structures and processes. So residency in the state is the only requirement there. Any single recipient may receive the award only once, but we do not limit the number of nominations that are connected to a single tradition. So if I may provide you an example, 2 years ago, the award went to, among others, Angel Rivera, in acknowledgement of his long-term contributions to a variety of Puerto Rican cultural traditions, notably bomba and plena. Last year, Edwin Masonet also received the Heritage Award, also in acknowledgement of his long-standing contributions also to bomba and plena. Bomba and plena could again be nominated. A nominee could again receive the award in 2026 if they are nominated in relation to those traditions, but Edwin and Angel themselves as individuals can never again receive it. So that's how that works right there. We do not give the award posthumously. We are able to accept self-nominations, and while the awardee, the nominee, must be located within Maryland, the nominator can be located anywhere in the world. I think I already mentioned that the review process involves an at-home period review by panelists who independently score each of the nominations, and then all panelists join together for a public virtual panel meeting. This is open to the public, so nominators, nominees, folks who are interested, anyone can join and listen into that panel meeting, which will occur on December, what did I say, 9th, 12th? This is a webinar. I'm being recorded. I want to get this right. One moment, please. December 9th, yes, is going to be our panel meeting. Then the nomination itself comprises two different types of information. We're looking for a variety of narrative contributions, and we're also looking for optional supplemental materials. The narrative components are a variety of questions that nominators are asked to respond to. And these cover a description of the cultural history and the community of origin of the form of folklike being traditions. So if I can return to the topic of Angel Rivera, the awardee here, Angel Rivera, a few years ago, just because I was speaking with him earlier this week, so he's fresh in my mind. The cultural history and community of origin within Angel's nomination would relate to variety of Puerto Rican culture, and the diaspora of Puerto Rico coming into Maryland. Nominators are also asked to speak to the current community participating in the form of folklife being considered in the nomination. So again, returning to Angel's nomination, that current community would be folks both in Puerto Rico living there, but also members of the Puerto Rican diaspora living here in Maryland, more generally in the Mid-Atlantic, and also folks who are not members of the Puerto Rican diaspora, but who form important and integral components of the various audiences that Angel engages through his performance. Nominators are also asked to provide information relating to or describing the nominee's importance to the current community participating in the form of folklife. Why are they, what is their long-standing contribution? What does their contribution look like? And how is that contribution important to that current community? Nominators are also asked to discuss the nominee's sustained engagement. And this, of course, goes back to that amount of time. And we recommend that nominators not only say, for example, nominee has been engaged in this form of folklife for decades or all their life, or, amount of time here. But we also recommend explaining why that amount of time is indicative of long-term achievement. And that, of course, can be either as an individual, whether it's one person or multiple people, as a community gathering place within the place nomination, or within the context of a traditional practice as a tradition nominee. Nominators are also asked to describe how receiving the award would provide a direct benefit not only to the nominee themselves, but also to the culture from which the tradition originates. So again, going back to the example of Angel Rivera's nomination award a few years ago, how does the award to him, the individual, benefit the larger traditions in which he is engaged? Now, I mentioned, in addition to narrative questions. Nominators are also welcome to include in a nomination a series of supplemental materials. These are optional, but they are highly recommended, largely because they can serve as the icing on the cake, the way of, I mean, frankly, if you think of the idea, the metaphor that, right, a picture is worth 1,000 words and a video is worth 1,000 pictures, the supplemental materials are ways to additionally communicate to panelists the importance of the nominee. And supplemental material formats that we can accept include up to 10 pages of PDF. That could be letters of recommendation, that could be media coverage, it could be articles about the nominee, articles written by the nominee, if they're a person or people category. Also audiovisual work samples. So these could be photographs, these could be links to audio recordings. If, for example, the nominee is a musician, it could be links to video, could be links to news media on the nominee. Sky is the limit here, and again, supplemental materials are optional, but highly recommended. To make an actual nomination, we recommend that everyone begin on the program page, which you can find on MSAC's website, msac.org, under the Programs tab. And once there, you will see in the upper right-hand corner the yellow Quick Resources box. And as an aside, every single MSAC grant program webpage has this exact same Quick Resources box with the same materials available program by program. And you see the blue arrows here on the slide pointing to that Quick Resources tab, Quick Resources box. And a second blue arrow that is pointing to the Heritage Award Grant Guidelines. We recommend you start here. The grant guidelines, and here's the cover page, are meant to answer any and every question that you could possibly have about the Heritage Award, about eligibility, about the nomination process, actual nomination questions with word count, how to access stuff, contact information for myself and my colleagues. I will say it's not the most exciting read. You might find yourself nodding over it, so if you're having trouble sleeping, this might be good bedtime reading, but it is meant to be more or less exhaustive. But we all know that nothing like this can ever be exhaustive, so included in here is contact information, as I said, from myself and my colleagues. If you have questions, please feel free and invited to reach out. We are here, we're literally paid to provide you with service and technical assistance, so make us earn our paychecks. When you actually begin making the nomination itself, that occurs within MSAC's grants management software, Smart Simple. Here is a screenshot of the login page here, and if you do not already have a login, a profile here, you are welcome to register for free. Use of Smart Simple is completely free to everyone. These two red arrows in the bottom of the screen here point to the register button. And unlike certain MSAC grant programs, which are available only to organizations or only to independent artists, both organizations and independent artists are able to make Heritage Awards. So if you have an existing organization profile, for example, you're welcome to make a Heritage Award nomination out of that. Once inside Smart Simple, you will see what we call the Grantee Home Dashboard. And yours will look a little different from mine, but the number of funding opportunities that the two red arrows point at in this slide are where you start. And clicking on that will take you to a variety of open opportunities, one of which, as of right now, is the Maryland Heritage Award. And once in it, you start an application, and of course, click Save so that things are actually saved. Always a good idea. And complete the application. Now, something new this year for folks who might have made a nomination in the past. While the nomination questions, the narrative questions that I already shared with you, have not changed, the method that you can use to make to respond to those nomination questions has increased and improved. Frankly, we're providing this as an accessibility option. They have always been available, but we're trying to make this a little clearer and a little more easily accessible. So of course, the first thing you see once you open an application is a question: how would you like to complete the nomination? And you are welcome to submit written responses to the nomination questions. This is, of course, what we've always had in the past. Each question has a word count limit. The word count limits change a little bit, but they're usually 200 words. I think for Heritage Award, it's pretty much in 250 words all the time. But you also have the option, if you prefer, or if this is an accessibility thing that would make life easier for you, to instead upload audio or video recordings each of about 3 minutes maximum in response to each respective nomination question. Again, the questions do not change, but instead of making a text-based keyboard response, you can do so by audio or video that you upload either as a .mp3, .mp4, .mov, .m4a, .aac, or WMV. Or, again, if you prefer, the third option here is to upload one single AV recording at maximizing at 15 minutes that responds in one single recording to all of the nomination questions. And again, the questions are the same for everyone, no matter if you're doing it in text input in a field, or if you're uploading discrete audio video recordings per nomination question, or one single audio video recording answering all of them. Again, the audio type, the file types that are accepted are the exact same, and the maximum file size, 2 gigs per file, is the same no matter which option you choose. For those of you who have received MSAC grants before, you will know this, but for folks who might be new to our grant offerings, we as staff, staff-wide program staff, are able to provide what we call technical support. And of course, in the context of the Maryland Heritage Award, I am that staff person. And when we say technical support, we really mean a wide variety of different options based really on what you, the applicant or the nominator, need help with. So for example, this could include the staff member reviewing your nomination prose, perhaps multiple times. This could be a one-time or a multiple-time meeting to discuss nomination strategies for your particular nomination or your particular application. These are things that are available on a first-come, first-served basis, as long as we, the staff, have capacity. But we found that we have capacity for quite a lot, and we hope you'll be in touch. Again, we are literally all of us staff paid to serve you, the constituents and residents of Maryland. So this is never an imposition. This is literally part of our jobs. And frankly, some of the most fun we have is getting the opportunity to interact with you, our constituents, and learn more about the interesting things that you and your communities are doing. Now, I'd like to share with you some nomination strategies. These are things that we've observed over the years tend to result in stronger Heritage Award nominations. And first, we strongly recommend writing for panelists you assume know nothing about your particular tradition. And I will say we've been very fortunate across all MSAC programs to work with a variety of very strong, skilled, and talented panelists who do excellent work. And again, they really make our jobs possible. So if you're interested in doing panelist work, do please consider that. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But because panelists are coming from many different geographic regions, perhaps they themselves are deeply engaged within the context of the Maryland Heritage Award. Panelists are deeply engaged in their own traditions, and or familiar with one or multiple traditions. That does not also mean that they are conversant with all traditions that might be in any particular cycle of the Heritage Award. So likely any given panelist in any given cycle is going to be of average or above average intelligence, cognizant and conversant with traditions and what they look like, but might know absolutely nothing about your particular tradition. So write as though you were writing, or make the recordings as though you're making recordings for kind of that 101 level, if I can phrase it that way, the basics, the broad strokes, the introductory version. We recommend not trying to include everything. Again, it's 250 words, it's 3 minutes, it's 15 minutes maximum across all questions, depending on which application format you choose. It's not possible to be able to communicate everything about any single tradition in that amount of space or time. So instead, do the highlights, give the broad overview, the umbrella of not the umbrella, excuse me, the bird's eye view, there we go, to explain the tradition to folks who know nothing about it. I mentioned, of course, the supplemental materials section, and we strongly urge you, again, it is optional, but we recommend A, that you include it, and B, that you use it to provide a taste, as opposed to, again, trying to provide the entire meal. There's not space in any grant application anywhere to be able to provide the whole meal, to provide the complete information on any given tradition or nominee. But as I mentioned earlier, the supplemental material section can be quite effective by showing what it is you are writing or speaking about within the narrative question responses. So for example, let's take the Heritage Awardee that you see here, Mama Linda Goss, within the Baltimore Black storytelling tradition. when she was part of that particular nomination, you'll forgive me, I'm getting things confused, she had also received an NEA National Heritage Fellowship in addition to being engaged in the Baltimore Black Storytelling Tradition Heritage Award. But Mama Linda, as an excellent case study here, a supplemental materials section of her could include, for example, video recordings or audio recordings of her storytelling, of her telling stories. It could include photographs of her performances. And then within the narrative responses, whether text or recording, you're welcome to say, for example, see recording 2 within the supplemental materials, or see photograph on page 5 of the supplemental materials. That kind of thing, referencing material within the supplemental materials to provide a taste, to provide an example of stuff that you speak to within the narrative questions. We also recommend as a nomination strategy of accessing technical assistance with us, the staff, multiple times. And of course, staff in this instance, in the Maryland Heritage Award context, of course, means myself. So please be in touch. Feel invited to send me a draft or schedule a conversation with me so we can talk narrative strategies, nomination strategies. And feel invited to do so multiple times. Of course, it is available on a first come, first served basis as I have capacity. My goal is to ensure that everyone has access to technical assistance at least once. But over the past several years, this has meant that multiple people have been able to access technical assistance multiple times. And as you can imagine, the more eyes on it, the stronger the application, the stronger the nomination. Finally, as a nomination strategy, we recommend that you apply to be a panelist. We hear from folks who have done panelist work for us across MSAC programs, but thinking especially about the Maryland Heritage Awards, that the experience of seeing the adjudication process, of being a panelist and scoring applications and getting a sense of what makes a stronger nomination on the back end as a panelist provides useful, extremely useful professional development perspective on how to better write grants and award nominations such as this. And many folks who do panelist work for MSAC then go on to write stronger applications that score higher, that perhaps might not have been getting funded previously, are suddenly getting funded just because they've had that experience on the back end adjudicating and kind of getting wrapped up in what it looks like from the panelists' perspective. So they are better thereafter to write for panelists. And if you are interested in being a Maryland Heritage Award panelist, I would heartily invite you to consider applying. That is also done through Smart Simple, and the deadline to do so is September 12th. And I will say, if you are also interested in making a nomination this cycle, you can do both. You can both be a panelist for the Heritage Award this cycle and make a nomination this cycle, and even be the subject of a nomination this cycle. If that circumstance arises, all you would do is not adjudicate your own nomination and not participate in any way in that particular conversation at that time. Very easy to occur, and we've had it happen a number of times. Next steps are that, as I just mentioned, the panelist call for Maryland Heritage Award panelists closes September 12th. Do please consider applying for this. Again, it is paid work, and we're fortunate actually to be able to pay some of the highest wages for this kind of work in the country. More information on panelist work, of course, can be found on msac.org under the About tab, ways to get involved. The Heritage Award itself, that nomination period is also currently open and closes on September 26th. As I mentioned earlier, the panel process will play out in October through December, with the panel itself on December 9th, and we will be notifying winners in January of 2026, at which point we will begin dispersing funds. My contact information is on MSAC's website, msac.org. It is also in the Heritage Award guidelines if you want to find me there, but it's also here on this slide should you want to be in touch, and I invite you please to be so. Always have to be in touch, always happy to answer your questions. And again, it's never an imposition, so do please feel invited to reach out. Wanted to save time at the end here. We've got a nice amount of time for any questions that you might have. Feel free, as you prefer, to use the raise hand function, or if you prefer to pop a question into the chat. And if, like me, you are the kind of person, I always do this, I always come up with a question after the entire event is over, please again feel invited to be in touch. Happy to answer questions now or later, as you prefer. Yes, busy, go ahead. Good to see you.
Hey, Ryan, thank you so much for this presentation. It's very exciting. One question I have, and you might have already alluded to it. Is there a comprehensive list of all of the awardees since these Traditional Arts Heritage Fellowship Awards have been given out by the Maryland State Arts?
Yes, indeed. And thank you so much for such a great question. So I'm popping a link in the chat here. And for folks who are watching this recording after the fact, I would direct you to the Maryland Traditions Archives. A link is on the Maryland Traditions program page. Maryland Traditions Archives are housed at UMBC, and amongst the many things that are available there is this LibGuide. The link is now in the chat. And this is a complete list of all Maryland Traditions grantees arranged by program and by fiscal year. And in there you will find a complete list of the Heritage Award recipients, as well as what the Heritage Award used to be known as the ALTA Awards, going back to 2007 to 2015 before the name was changed to Heritage Award, but it's all one program. So you get a sense of who has won the award. It's a deliciously rich variety of traditions from across the country and across the world, now home in Maryland, from every single corner of the state.
That's great. And also, again, you might have mentioned this right off the bat. Is there a limit to how many nominations one can make?
Do you mean across consecutive fiscal years or in one single fiscal year?
No, like in this year. I have a list of 6 people who I think would be really great, to acknowledge their lifetime contribution.
That is a fantastic question. So all 6 individuals, of course, could be nominated, but you yourself as nominator could only make 1 nomination per cycle.
Okay. All right. So it'll be my challenge to find others to nominate. I will go about that.
Also, an option too is that even those 6 people would have to be nominated by 6 separate people or organizations. You, of course, could be involved in those nominations, helping writing them, edit them, as you have capacity for, but they would need to come from different people. We have seen that a time or two.
No, that's good to know. Yeah. All right. Well, I will look forward to putting that together. Wonderful. And then I don't know, Ryan, is this, I'm sorry, I hope I'm not taking up other people's time here, or that they might have the same question. In terms of finding panelists to serve the Arts Council with this task, can you give some idea what the approximate number of hours required for a panelist job?
I can, yes. Let me pull that up real quick. I want exactly what I say. I have a spiel, but the spiel is kind of more generic, and I'd like to make sure that I'm giving you what you would need to know for the this particular panelist work. So, of course, you all know I've already discussed a few moments ago that the deadline to apply to be a panelist is September 12th. And the actual amount of time that we ask panelists to do labor varies, and it varies based off of the number of total Heritage Award nominations that they adjudicate. And of course, that is based on the number of people who actually make nominations. And that is why if you go to the Ways to Get Involved page, and I will pop that link into the chat as well, you'll see that the compensation range is rather large. It's $375 up to $550. That again is representative of the actual amount of time that could differ if there are, I don't think I've seen this ever, but if there are 5 nominations versus if there are 40. We typically see about 25 to 35 nominations, and we assume that each panelist is going to, during the at-home review, take about 45 minutes per nomination. Other components that panelists are asked is to attend all virtual, 2-hour-long training on how to do the actual adjudication, as well as an unconscious bias training as part of that, and then the actual Heritage Award panel itself. And I think we reserve about 6 hours for that. Let me look at that. Yes, 6 hours. Often all that time is not needed, but it's always good to have a little bit of elbow room. So 6
All right.
hours for panel meeting, 2 hours training, and 45 minutes for adjudication at home of the actual nominations.
All right, that's great to know. Very helpful in terms of, trying to recruit some new panelists.
Yes, and that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Chinese, I see your note here in the chat. Thank you very much. Glad that the presentation was so useful. Anyone else have any other questions? We do have some times here, so we're not pushed for it. He says, thank you. I'm having tech problems. Looking forward to seeing the recording. Thank you so much for joining us, Fatni, and I'm sorry that the tech issues were plaguing you. There did definitely seem to be some gremlins in tech in general today, and not just on this webinar, and I'm sorry you were ensnared by them. Any other questions before we wrap up for the day?
If nobody else has a question, Ryan, this
Please.
is off topic, so I don't know if it's fair to ask her whether I should, schedule a time to call you. It's about the possibility of hosting retreats, celebrating folk and traditional arts, and bringing artists of diverse cultures and traditions together to collaborate and create cross-cultural creations, collaborations, and across disciplines as well. So I think maybe I'll try to schedule a call with you about that.
That would be wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, Phil Wiggins was part of a retreat we had out on the Eastern Shore that was just phenomenal, and I would love to revisit that someday. Alas, without Phil, but
alas, without Phil, yes.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if Phil was involved, then no wonder it was such a wonderful, positive experience.
Exactly.
But yes, you have my email. Please be in touch, and we'll schedule a conversation.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, thanks again, Ryan. It's great to see you.
You're very welcome. Good to see you too.
We'll be in touch.
Sounds good. All righty. If there are no more questions, then I will thank you all so much for joining this afternoon and remind you that this recording will be available on MSAC's YouTube channel in probably early next week, and also on the Heritage Award program page as a resource. So thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.